Dr. Nera Blackwood stood at the viewport of the approaching Etherian vessel, her dark eyes reflecting the crystalline spires of the most advanced civilization humanity had ever encountered. Her fingers absently traced the spiral patterns of her neural interface bracelet, a nervous habit she'd developed during her years of xenobiological research. Remarkable, isn't it? Professor Julian Reed adjusted his antiquated spectacles, a deliberate anachronism among the sleek technology surrounding them. The Etherians achieved genetic perfection centuries ago. Their bodies don't age, their minds process information at quantum speeds, and they've eliminated all disease. Nera's lips curved into a slight frown. And yet they requested Earth's help. Specifically, they requested me. She turned to her mentor, her expression thoughtful. Something doesn't add up, Julian. The truth revealed itself hours later in the sterile confines of the Etherian High Council's medical facility. Nera stood before a wall of quantum displays, each showing microscopic images of Etherian cellular structure. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Their cells were dying, not in the natural way of human cellular death and renewal, but in a profound, irreversible pattern she'd never seen before. The Etherians' perfect genetic code was collapsing in on itself, like a star reaching critical mass. "We've tried everything," first scientist Astrid Voss explained, her silver skin almost translucent under the facility's harsh lighting. "Our bodies no longer respond to genetic manipulation. We cannot reproduce. We're failing." Nera zoomed in on one of the displays, her neural interface syncing with the Etherian systems. "Your genetic architecture is too rigid," she murmured. "You've engineered out all cellular plasticity. There's no room for adaptation." Prince Thuron, the youngest member of the Etherian ruling council, stepped forward. Unlike his peers, whose movements were precise and measured, he carried himself with an almost human restlessness. "Can you help us, Dr. Blackwood?" She turned to face the assembled council members, nodding their perfect features, their identical silver-white hair, their eyes that showed no emotion. They had achieved the ultimate evolution, and it was killing them. "Yes," she said finally, "but you won't like the solution." Over the next few hours, Nera explained her theory. Human DNA was messy, chaotic, full of what the Etherians would consider errors and redundancies. But within that chaos lay the key to survival, adaptation. Human cells could change, mutate, evolve. They could learn. "You're suggesting we devolve?" Astrid's voice carried a hint of horror, the first real emotion Nera had detected from any of them. "I'm suggesting you remember how to live," Nera corrected. She projected a hologram of human stem cells, their wild dance of division and differentiation filling the room. "Life isn't about perfection. It's about change." Prince Thuron watched the display with unusual intensity. "How would we begin?" Nera activated her neural interface, sending data to the council's systems. "I've developed a retroviral therapy using modified human stem cells. It will reintroduce genetic variability into your population. You'll be able to reproduce again, to heal, to evolve." "And the side effects?" Julian asked quietly from his corner. She met his eyes briefly before addressing the council. "Your people will experience emotions again, real ones, not the programmed responses you've engineered. You'll feel pain, joy, fear, love. Your children will be different from one another. You'll lose your perfect uniformity." The council chamber erupted in whispered conversations, the most disorder Nera had seen from them. Prince Thuron's voice cut through the noise. "We'll die without change." "We'll cease to be Etherian with it," Astrid countered. Nera watched the debate unfold, knowing this was only the beginning. The Etherians had spent centuries eliminating what they considered biological weaknesses. Now their survival depended on embracing those very flaws. Prince Thuron approached her as the council argued. "My father, the High Sovereign, is dying," he said softly. "He won't last another cycle. The council knows this, but they're afraid to act." "And you?" Nera studied his face, seeing something there that the others lacked. A shadow of emotion, perhaps, or a ghost of the humanity their ancestors once shared. "I dream sometimes," he confessed. "The others don't. They say dreams are inefficient, a primitive neural pattern we eliminated, but I dream of colors we've forgotten, of feelings we've never named. I think we were wrong, Dr. Blackwood, about everything. Neera's neural interface hummed with incoming data, cellular decay rates, population statistics, genetic stability projections. The Etherians had perhaps a decade before their perfect genes began to fail catastrophically. But the change she proposed would begin transforming their society immediately. "Call me Neera," she said, making her decision. "We have work to do." As the council continued their debate, Neera began preparing the first batch of retroviral treatment. She knew that saving the Etherians would mean destroying everything they thought they were. Some would resist. Some would hate her for it. But as she caught Prince Thuron watching the dance of human stem cells with wonder in his engineered perfect eyes, she knew it was worth the risk. Sometimes healing meant breaking down walls that were built too high, too strong. Sometimes salvation looked like chaos. The whispers of decay would soon become a symphony of rebirth. The laboratory hummed with quantum processors as Dr. Neera Blackwood examined the results of her first trial. Through the observation window, she watched as Prince Thuron paced the sterile chamber, his silver skin flushed with an unfamiliar pink undertone, the first visible sign that the treatment was working. "Your heart rate has increased by 30%, she noted, monitoring the biometric feeds. "How do you feel?" Thuron stopped packing, pressing a hand to his chest. "Unstable, irregular." A faint smile touched his lips, another unprecedented change. "Alive." The door hissed open as first scientist Astrid Voss entered, her face a mask of controlled concern. "The council demands an update on the prince's condition." There, unsettled by reports of his behavioral changes. "Behavioral changes are expected," Neera replied, keeping her voice steady. "The reintroduction of genetic variability affects everything from cellular metabolism to neurotransmitter production. Prince Thuron is experiencing emotions as his brain chemistry shifts toward a more natural state." "Natural is not necessarily better," Astrid countered, but her perfect posture faltered slightly as she watched Thuron. "He's becoming unpredictable." "I'm becoming real," Thuron said. He approached the window separating them, and Neera noticed his movements were less precise now, more fluid. "Astrid, do you remember what it was like before the great enhancement? The histories speak of music, of dance, of dreams." "Those were primitive times," Astrid said, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. "We evolved beyond such inefficiencies." Professor Julian Reed looked up from his data terminal, adjusting his spectacles. Did you just build walls so high you forgot what was on the other side?" Before Astrid could respond, the laboratory's emergency protocols activated. Red warning lights bathed the room as data streamed across multiple displays. Neera's hands flew across the holographic interface, her neural bracelet pulsing with incoming information. "What's happening?" Astrid demanded. "The High Sovereign," Neera said grimly. "His condition is deteriorating faster than predicted. The cellular decay has reached critical levels." Thuron pressed his palm against the observation window. "Father," he whispered, and the raw emotion in his voice made Astrid step back in shock. "We need to expand the treatment program immediately," Neera declared. "Starting with the younger generation. If we don't act now, the decay will become irreversible within months, not years." "The Council will never approve such a rapid deployment," Astrid protested. "The social implications will be significant," Julian interrupted. "But extinction tends to have rather serious social implications as well." Neera pulled up the genetic models she'd been working on. "Look at this. Prince Thuron's cellular structure is already showing signs of adaptation. His body is learning to repair itself. The treatment isn't just preventing decay, it's teaching your people how to heal again." Thuron touched his face, feeling the warmth there. "I had a dream last night," he said quietly. "The first real one. Not just abstract data patterns, but images, feelings. I saw our cities filled with color, heard music in the streets. I saw children who looked different from their parents, who laughed without restraint." "Chaos," Astrid whispered. Life, Thuron corrected. Neera watched the interaction with growing hope. Even Astrid's resistance seemed to be wavering, her perfect facade cracking just enough to show glimpses of curiosity beneath. "We'll start with volunteers," Neera proposed. "Young Etherians who understand the risks and choose to undergo the treatment, as the benefits become evident." "I volunteer," Astrid said suddenly. Everyone turned to stare at her. She stood straighter, but her hands trembled slightly. "If we're to evaluate this treatment properly, we need to understand it from multiple perspectives. As first scientist, it's my duty to experience the effects firsthand." Neera caught a glimpse of something in Astrid's eyes. Fear, yes, but also a hunger she might not even recognize. A longing for something the Etherians had sacrificed generations ago. Over the next weeks, the treatment program expanded carefully. Each new volunteer brought changes, subtle shifts in skin tone, unexpected laughs, tears shed for the first time in centuries. The sterile halls of the medical facility began to echo with new sounds, whispered conversations, spontaneous humming, even occasional arguments. Professor Julian documented everything, his ancient paper notebook filling with observations. "It's remarkable," he told Neera one evening. "They're not just changing physically, their entire society is remembering how to feel." But with feeling came pain. The High Sovereign's condition continued to worsen, and Thuron spent hours by his father's bedside, experiencing grief in all its raw intensity. Neera found him there late one night, tears streaming down his face. "I never understood before," he said as she sat beside him. "Why humans held on to each other when someone was dying, why you chose to feel such pain." He looked at her, his eyes bright with tears. "But now I do, it hurts because it matters." Neera took his hand, feeling the warmth of his newly awakened emotions. "That's the price and the gift of being truly alive. Everything matters more." As word of the treatment's success spread, more Etherians came forward. Young couples dreaming of natural childbirth. Artists whose perfect technical skills had never produced anything truly new. Scientists like Astrid, who began to see beauty in the chaos of cellular evolution. But resistance was growing too. The council remained divided, with many members arguing that the treatment threatened everything the Etherians had built. They called it a regression, a surrender to primitive impulses. They didn't understand yet that seeds need soil to grow, that perfection without change was just another word for death. But as Neera watched Thuron lead the first public dance in centuries, his movements unpracticed but joyful, she knew the change had taken root. The seeds were sprouting, and no amount of sterile resistance could stop the garden from growing wild. First scientist Astrid Voss stood before her reflection, tracing the subtle changes in her appearance. Strands of her once uniform silver hair had darkened to stormy gray, and faint lines had appeared around her eyes, not from age, but from something far more revolutionary. She had begun to smile. "The changes are accelerating," she noted into her research log, her formerly precise diction now carrying hints of musical inflection. "Subject 01's emotional development continues to exceed projections." "You don't have to call yourself a subject anymore," Dr. Neera Blackwood said softly from the doorway. "The clinical distance isn't helping anyone." Astrid turned, fighting the urge to straighten her posture to regulation perfection. "Old habits," she admitted, "though I suppose that's what we're trying to break, isn't it?" The medical wing of the Etherian Genetic Institute had transformed over the past months. The stark white walls now bore swirling patterns of bioluminescent algae, a decoration proposed by one of the treated youngsters who had suddenly developed an interest in artistic expression. The once silent corridors echoed with conversations, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter or even tears. Prince Thuron appeared, his face flushed from what he called his movement experiments dance, though many on the council refused to use such a primitive term. "The High Sovereign is asking for you both," he said, his voice carrying new depths of emotion. "He's made a decision." In the Sovereign's chamber, machines hummed with decreasing efficiency, struggling to maintain the failing body of Etheria's supreme leader. Yet his eyes were clearer than they had been in weeks as he regarded his son and the two scientists. "I've watched," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "as my people remember how to live. It is beautiful." His hand trembled as he reached for Thuron. "And terrible, change always is." "Father," Thuron began, but the sovereign continued. "The council is fracturing. Counselor Perseus leads those who would rather we die perfect than live flawed. They're preparing to act against the treatment program." Neera's neural interface buzzed with incoming alerts. "They've already begun," she reported grimly. "Security protocols are being rewritten. They're limiting access to the medical facilities." "Then we must act first," Astrid said, surprising herself with the fierce conviction in her voice. "I propose emergency implementation of Protocol Omega." The Sovereign's eyes widened. The emergency broadcast system? That would expose the entire capital to the treatment through the atmospheric processors. "It would give everyone the choice," Astrid countered. "Once exposed, their own bodies would decide, adapt, or remain unchanged. True biological democracy." Professor Julian Reed, who had been quietly observing from the corner, finally spoke. "It would also be irreversible, and not everyone will survive the change." "Not everyone is surviving now," Thuron said quietly, looking at his father. The Sovereign closed his eyes, feeling the decay in his cells, too advanced now for even Neera's treatment to reverse. "Do it," he commanded. "Let my last act be giving my people back their freedom to change." What followed was controlled chaos. As Astrid and Neera prepared the modified treatment for atmospheric dispersal, Thuron addressed the public through quantum channels, explaining what was coming. Professor Julian coordinated with the medical teams, preparing for the wave of transformations about to begin. Counselor Perseus and his followers tried to prevent the release, but they hadn't counted on the palace guard, many of whom had secretly undergone the treatment, choosing to defend the Sovereign's last command. The change began as a shimmer in the air, a subtle shift in the carefully regulated atmosphere of the capital city. Within hours, the first responses began. Some Etherians fell ill as their bodies fought the change. Others experienced immediate awakening, their engineered emotional suppressants dissolving under the influence of the treatment. In the streets, centuries of rigid order dissolved into something new. A young maintenance worker began singing, not the mathematical harmonies of traditional Etherian music, but a wild, imperfect melody that others soon joined. Children whose education had been purely technical started drawing in the condensation on windows, creating patterns that had never existed before. But there was pain, too. Some elderly Etherians, their bodies too rigid to adapt, passed away peacefully in their sleep. Others struggled with the flood of returned emotions, overwhelmed by feelings they hadn't experienced in generations. Astrid found herself in the midst of it all, her scientist's precision warring with her newly awakened empathy. She helped where she could, offering both technical expertise and, to her own surprise, comfort. "I never understood," she confessed to Neera as they watched the sunrise paint the crystalline spires with colors that suddenly seemed more vivid. "When you first arrived, I thought you were offering a cure for our physical decay. But that wasn't it at all, was it?" Neera shook her head. "Your bodies were just a symptom. The real decay was in forgetting how to change, how to feel, how to be gloriously imperfect." From the Sovereign's tower came news that the leader had passed, his last moments spent watching his people remember how to dance. Prince Thuron emerged to address the city, tears flowing freely down his face, a sight that would have been shocking mere months ago, but now seemed right, seemed human. "My father's last words," he told the assembled crowd, his voice carrying both grief and hope, "were that he could hear music again. Not the mathematical progressions we've called music for centuries, but real music born of joy and sorrow and love." He paused, looking out at his changing people. "We are not devolving. We are not losing what we are. We are remembering who we were always meant to be." In her laboratory, Professor Julian made careful notes as the city transformed. "It's remarkable," he mused. "Their bodies are literally learning to adapt again. Each generation will be different now, unpredictable, alive." Isn't that what evolution always was? Astrid asked, watching a group of children with varying hair colors play in the courtyard below. Not a march toward perfection, but a dance with change. As night fell over the capital, the first natural childbirth in centuries began in the medical wing. Around the mother gathered a circle of support, not medical drones, but real people, offering hands to hold and voices raised in encouragement. When the baby's cry pierced the air, it carried the sound of a future that would never again be perfect, and would be all the better for it. The attempted assassination came at dawn. Counselor Perseus's loyalists, their bodies still unchanged, launched their attack during Prince Thuron's morning address. Their weapons were elegant and precise, like everything else about the old Etherian way. But they hadn't accounted for one critical change: the guards' newly awakened instincts. "Down!" shouted Captain Lyra, her enhanced reflexes now guided by intuition rather than pure calculation. She tackled Thuron as energy pulses scattered the crowd. The prince's skin was warm against hers, another sensation that would have been deemed inappropriate mere months ago. "The treatment center," Thuron gasped as they took cover. "They'll target Dr. Blackwood and First Scientist Voss, the research." "Already being secured," Lyra assured him, tapping her neural link. Through it, she could feel the chaos erupting across the capital, but also the coordinated response of her fellow guards, moving with newfound creativity and passion to protect their changing people. In the treatment center's primary lab, Nira and Astrid worked frantically to secure their data. Professor Julian stood watch at the door, his antiquated pistol seeming absurdly primitive among the advanced Etherian weapons. "They're not just after us," Astrid said, her voice tight with newfound anxiety. "They're after hope itself, the proof that we can change." "Then we'll give them change," Nira replied, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces. "But not the way they expect." When Perseus's forces breached the lab, they found it empty, except for the atmospheric processors, running at full capacity. The air shimmed with treatment particles, invisible but potent. "You've left us no choice," Nira's voice came through the facility's communication system. "Either adapt or retreat, but you cannot stop evolution itself." Some of the attackers fled. Others fell to their knees as the treatment took hold, their bodies finally surrendering to transformation. A few fought to the end, their perfect forms collapsing as they refused to adapt. In the aftermath, as security forces led away the survivors, Thuron found Nira in the garden sector, a new addition to the facility, filled with actual living plants rather than the synthetic flora that had decorated Etherian buildings for centuries. "You knew they would come," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Change always meets resistance," she replied, touching a real flower, one of the first to bloom in Etherian soil in generations. "But life finds a way. It always has." "What did it feel like?" he asked suddenly. "Growing up with all these emotions, these variations, weren't you ever afraid of the chaos?" Nira smiled, remembering her own childhood on Earth. "Of course, fear is part of life, but so is love, joy, wonder. They make the fear worthwhile." Across the city, the transformation continued. Those who had first received the treatment were already showing remarkable adaptations. Children born to treated parents displayed genetic diversity not seen in millennia. Artists, musicians, and dreamers emerged from the formerly rigid social structure. But there were costs. Some families were torn apart as members chose different paths. The economic systems, built on perfect prediction and control, had to be entirely restructured. And the emotional awakening brought with it all the complexities of human-like consciousness: depression, anxiety, conflict. Professor Julian documented it all, his paper notebook now supplemented by quantum recordings. "It's fascinating," he told Astrid as they reviewed the data. "Your people are speedrunning thousands of years of emotional evolution in months." Astrid, who had begun wearing her hair in disorder and experimenting with colored clothing, nodded. "We're remembering things our ancestors knew, things we traded away for an impossible perfection." She paused, touching her chest where her heart now beat with genuine feeling. "Do you think we made the right choice?" "I think," Julian said carefully, That right and wrong are part of what you're learning to figure out for yourselves again. In the evening, as the capital's crystalline spires caught the sunset in ways that seemed more beautiful now that they could truly appreciate beauty, Thuron called together the remaining council members. Some still moved with mechanical precision, fighting the changes in their bodies. Others showed clear signs of transformation, expressions, gestures, voices that carried emotion. "We cannot go back," he told them simply. "But we can choose how we go forward." Our ancestors sought to eliminate pain, fear, disorder. They didn't understand that these things are the price of being alive, really alive. Standing in the council chamber, Nira felt the weight of history. The Etherians had nearly destroyed themselves in pursuit of perfection. Now they were learning perhaps the hardest lesson of all: how to be beautifully, terribly, wonderfully imperfect. As night fell, new music drifted through the city streets, not the mathematically precise harmonies of old, but something wild and real, the sound of hearts remembering how to sing. 5 years after the Great Change, the Etherian capital barely resembled its former self. The crystalline spires remained, but they were now draped with living gardens, their perfect geometries softened by the chaos of natural growth. In the central plaza, where once only the sound of regulated footsteps could be heard, a symphony orchestra practiced, their music a blend of mathematical precision and wild emotion that could exist nowhere else in the galaxy. Dr. Nira Blackwood stood in her expanded laboratory, now more greenhouse than sterile facility, examining the latest genetic samples. Each one told a story of ongoing evolution, of bodies and souls learning to dance with change rather than fight it. "The diversity is extraordinary," Astrid said, entering with a fresh cup of tea, a human habit she'd grown to love. Her silver hair now held streaks of deep blue, a spontaneous mutation that had delighted her rather than horrified her. "Each new child born shows unique combinations we never could have engineered." "That's the beauty of natural evolution," Nira replied, setting aside her instruments. "It's not about reaching perfection, it's about endless exploration." Through the window, they could see Prince, now High Sovereign, Thuron teaching a group of children in the garden. Unlike the rigid education of the past, he sat with them on the grass, encouraging questions, nurturing curiosity. His own daughter, the first natural-born royal in centuries, played among them, her hair a startling combination of silver and gold. Professor Julian, his paper notebook now accompanied by a neural interface he'd finally conceded to use, continued his documentation. "The most remarkable change," he observed, "isn't in their genes at all. It's in their culture. They've learned to value difference rather than fear it." He was right. The new Etherian society was a fascinating blend of their advanced technology and rediscovered humanity. Their quantum computers now processed art and poetry alongside scientific calculations. Their medical facilities treated emotional well-being as carefully as physical health. Even their architecture had evolved, with new buildings designed to grow and change over time. But the transformation hadn't been without its price. Memorials stood throughout the city, honoring those who hadn't survived the change, either by choice or by biological necessity. The perfect immortality of the past was gone, replaced by shorter but fuller lives. "Was it worth it?" Nira asked one evening, as she and Thuron stood in the Royal Observatory watching the dance of distant galaxies. "All the loss, the pain, the uncertainty." Thuron was quiet for a moment, his hand unconsciously moving to where his heart now beat with genuine emotion. "I asked my daughter that question in my own way," he said finally. "Do you know what she did? She laughed, just laughed pure and free the way we never could before. That laugh was worth everything." In her private quarters, Astrid completed her final entry as first scientist. She was stepping down, making way for younger minds with wilder ideas. "We thought we were reaching for the stars," she wrote, "when really we were closing ourselves in crystal coffins. True evolution isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming more alive." The entry would join the historical archives, alongside Professor Julian's notebooks and Nira's research data. Future generations would study the Great Change not as a medical procedure or a political revolution, but as the moment when a civilization chose to embrace life in all its messy glory. As the sun set on another beautifully imperfect day, Neera walked through the city streets. Children played games their parents had never known. Couples expressed love in ways that would have once been considered primitive. Artists worked with both quantum tools and simple brushes, creating things that had never existed before. In the distance, the symphony orchestra began their evening performance. The music soared over the city, complex mathematical patterns interwoven with pure emotional expression, technology and nature dancing together in ways neither human nor original Etherian could have imagined. Professor Julian found her there listening. "You know," he said, "when we first arrived, they thought we were coming to save them, but that wasn't quite right, was it?" Neera shook her head, feeling the warm evening breeze. The environmental controls now allowed for small, delightful variations. "We just reminded them how to save themselves, how to live again." Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The Etherians had once sought to become as perfect and unchanging as those distant lights. Now they knew better. Now they understood that even stars were born, lived, changed, and died, and that this cycle of eternal change was the truest perfection of all. In the heart of the city, a new child was being born, unique, unpredictable, alive with possibilities. Around the mother gathered a community that had learned to feel, to care, to love. Their perfect facade was gone, replaced by something far more precious: the ability to grow, to change, to make mistakes and learn from them. They had traded immortality for life itself. And in doing so, they had found a different kind of forever, not in unchanging perfection, but in the endless symphony of evolution, playing on through generations yet to come. As night fell completely, Neera looked up at the stars and smiled, knowing that somewhere out there, other civilizations might be reaching for the same impossible perfection the Etherians had once achieved. Perhaps someday they too would learn the hardest and most beautiful lesson of all: that life's greatest glory lies not in the absence of flaws, but in the courage to keep changing, growing, and feeling, forever incomplete, and all the more perfect for it.